Overwatch 2 has a counter swapping, counter picking problem, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Quick disclaimer before we get into the video is that usually when I make videos like this, I try my level best to make them as informative as possible. However, I do my level best to also make these simple and easy to digest, because I know there are people watching these videos that are new to the game, returning to the game, or in the process of learning the game. So, only reason I'm saying that is because there's people in the comments that sometimes decide to be smartasses and say things like, well, Mr. Abby, you could have talked about this too. And yes, I could have, but then it makes the situation too complex to understand, and I might lose somebody in terms of understanding the concept that I might actually retain them and understanding what I'm talking about. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about the counterpicking problem. Before we talk about the overall issue with counter swapping and things like that, I want to talk about two terms that we need to understand before going forward: soft countering and hard countering. Soft countering is when a character is usually favored to win a duel against another character, but it is a pretty fair skill matchup between the two different characters involved in the fight. In this case, Cassidy soft counters Pharah, and the duel supposedly should favor him because Pharah sucks against hitscan. Now, if the Pharah player is pretty well skilled in understanding how to manipulate her flight pattern as well as play around natural cover, she can time an engagement and take out the Cassidy. So it's a pretty fair and skillful matchup, and in that regard, because it doesn't favor Pharah as much, the Pharah is rewarded accordingly for outplaying the Cassidy, which is a good thing, right? We want to reward skill in this game, as well as game sense, awareness, map knowledge, blah blah, all that stuff. Now, hard countering is a different problem. This is where I feel the community frustration begins to come in. Hard countering is the problem where when one character is able to strip away the agency from another character, usually the tank role, so quickly that there's nothing that you can do about it. Now, in the Cassidy and the Pharah example that I took, the Cassidy or the Pharah, well, in this case, the Pharah who's being countered can play smarter and better. Again, another soft counter example is if you pick beam heroes into Genji, the Genji just has to play closer to his team and shift his playstyle to be a little bit more passive, rely more on Blade, and play less aggressive in order to not get melted quickly. So again, another soft counter situation. Be smart about it, and he knows when to isolate those beam characters. Let's say if he's able to isolate a Mei or a Sim, he's able to shut them down pretty effectively. But again, that's a skill that he's being rewarded for. Just because somebody else picked a beam hero doesn't mean that Genji completely fell apart. Another soft counter situation could also be Reaper versus Winston. If Winston knows how to bubble dance really well, he can actually get around the Reaper pick, and even in some cases, if you know what you're doing, you will never ever die to the Reaper, and the Reaper will just feel confused. Granted that Reaper feels really, really bad these days. This then brings us back to the hard counter example. Now, let's go back to using Winston as our example here. I'm playing Winston, and I decide that I want to dive the enemy team. Now, they have a Bastion. When I get in there, and I use all my resources, I use my jump, I use my shield, and now I'm tasering people down. Bastion presses shift, and he immediately deletes my HP bar. Right? And even if I try to jump away or kite away or anything like that, his team is able to take advantage of the massive burst damage that he's brought in and finish me off on Winston instead. And this is where the frustration comes in, that all it took was one pick and now I can't play the game. Because what are you supposed to do as Winston in that case? Do you just wait for your DPS to find a way to kill the Bastion? But if we don't jump that Bastion's team, his supports will just constantly keep him alive against, our DPS. So in this case, the Winston pick begins to lose a lot of power. Can you still play Winston into the Bastion and try to make it work and win? Yes, you can. But is it going to be so difficult that it makes you want to rip your hair out? Yes, for sure. There's no denying that. And it doesn't feel good. Coach Spilo spoke about this topic really, really well, where he said that yes, counter swapping is a thing, but the overall main issue that he talked about is you can still play the hero that you want to play. It's just not going to feel good as you play the hero in that scenario, because of course there's more pressure coming in your way than there is you throwing back that pressure in any meaningful way. And because you're pressured and you're getting harassed more often than not by a counter pick that is really strong against you, the window for you to be able to do anything feels so little. Like there's a very small opportunity for you to really make your pick work And if you're unable to execute that every team fight, you're going to fall apart. And that is basically something that the tank role faces a lot right now. Not just from interactions like Roadhog versus Ana's Nade, or even Mauga and Junker Queen, and even Ramatra in Nemesis form falls prey to Ana's Nade very quickly and her sleep dart as well. But also, in this case, Orisa. Orisa bullies a lot of the tanks, specifically against Ryan and Winston in the average player lobbies. Orisa can feel really oppressive against almost all the tanks. She does a really good job at controlling Doomfist. She can be really effective against almost every tank. And again, looking at this from the average player's perspective, it can almost always feels like there's never an answer to the Orisa unless you play Zarya. But on Zarya, you need to get charged up. You need to have additional damage help bursting the Orisa. So what's frustrating about this scenario is that you need, while yes, you can counterpick into the Orisa, let's just say Zarya is a soft counterpick into Orisa, you also need something else from another aspect of your team to help confirm the kill onto that Orisa player. Because that's the only way that you're going to get around that Orisa pick. Otherwise, you're pretty much getting your whole lobby held hostage by this one Orisa. And the worst part about it is everybody behind the Orisa can play the game however they want. So, what is my main point behind all of this, right? Primarily is that easy to play heroes that bring high value shouldn't ever be put in a viable state. For some strange reason, the balance lead at Blizzard, Alec Dawson, and his balance team believe that every hero should be on that same level of pick rate. They decide a lot of things by data, and I even saw Aaron Keller recently make a tweet about saying, well, Reinhardt is not in a bad spot because our data says, and my response to that is, enough with the data. Data doesn't represent how the gameplay actually feels. And yes, while I think Ryan is okay, I definitely think Ryan does need some help here and there. And no character should be in the state where another character is Reaper. Like, Reaper is in a really bad state, and I feel like not enough people talk about the Reaper problem. Reaper has no identity in the game. Anywhere that you can play Reaper, Bastion and Torbjorn are just better picks. And arguably, Bastion and Torbjorn are also easier to play. And they can do more. And they're more effective than Reaper. It's a little bit silly, right? Because I would argue that Reaper needs a little bit more skill than Bastion and Torbjorn. But that's not the topic for today. We'll have a Reaper video in the future on Reaper's problems and all this type of stuff. My point basically is Bastion, Torbjorn, Orisa. And now, these are the ones that pretty much majority of the community agree upon. And I'm going to slide in one more hero in here. That could be a little bit controversial, but you know, you're free to disagree. I also think we need to stop overhyping Mei, because it's not that hard to play her. Once you understand how to place down a wall, that's her whole skill expression is the wall. She's got some really big projectiles on her right click. Her left click is incredibly easy to use. Ice block is really simple and easy to understand the way you use it, and her ultimate is pretty straightforward too in the way you want to use it. Mei is not that hard to pick up, get used to, and master. She's very, very easy to play as well. But where does the strength of characters like Mei, Torbjorn, and Bastion come from? These three have one thing in common, is that they're so good at shutting down the tank. And because of that, the reason because of why that is again, they're able to strip the agency from that tank player so quickly. If you have a Reinhardt walking up to you, Ramatra walking up to you, and you put a Mei wall behind them, and your whole team just walks into that one guy, what is he supposed to do? Right? If you're playing somebody like, let's say, well, we talked about the Winston Bastion example, you're playing somebody like, you know, I don't even know. If you're playing like Wrecking Ball and your team is, even if you have like one stud, granted that ball is in a really weird spot and bad spot, but if you're playing Wrecking Ball and they even have like one form of stun on a sleep dart, and then the amount of burst damage that can come your way from there as ball is like, even if you don't die, you just fed so much ultra. It's like, what are you doing? And granted that in this case, Ana's sleep dart is a skill shot, and yes, against a bigger character, it'll be easier to land. My point is still basically there. Like, I don't know. It, you know, there are just some things where if it was up to me, it'll be a lot different. Ball has his own set of problems, but my point in all of this is I'm going to isolate these issues, not to the support abilities because I spoke about them numerous times in different videos. At the moment, I'm focusing more on damage and tank, and easy to play heroes like Bastion, Torbjorn, and Orisa shouldn't get as much value as characters that need more skill than them. If not, they actually bring in even more value because they've been buffed to really, really strong states. In my personal opinion, Bastion, Torb, and Orisa still need nerf. They need a little bit more nerfs given to them because they should only be allowed to work in low elo lobbies. And this is something that the Blizzard developers need to understand, is not every hero needs to be at the same level. Bastion shouldn't be as viable as, let's say, Sojourn the higher up you go, right? There should be like okay, he works in bronze, silver, gold, and even plat. But then the second you hit diamond, well, Bastion just kind of falls off because like he just does. The other characters that require a lot more skill are just much better than him. He can do more than, you know, let's say Ashe or Sojourn or Soldier 76. But at the moment he does, and it doesn't feel good. And that's the problem. It's like when you keep creating these scenarios where the counter swap heroes are easy to play and they bring high value in the way that they do get played against characters where you do want to play them, it makes the game feel incredibly frustrating to play. So in conclusion, can you play against soft and hard counters? Yes. Against soft counters, I'd argue that it is a pretty decent skill matchup where, yeah, it'll probably favor the other guy a little bit more, but if you know what you're doing, you know how to work around the map, play around health packs, or, you know, depends on the hero and scenario, you can outplay your soft counters. However, against hard counter scenarios, if you're playing Reinhardt and you've gone up against the Orisa, bro, like, I don't know what to tell you, right? And then to make matters worse, if she has a Bastion with her, what are you going to do on Ryan? Hurry up, pack it up, go on Sigma or Zarya, do your best. This is where this frustration comes in. It's so easy to play Orisa and Bastion, but it is not going to be easy to play Reinhardt into Orisa and Bastion. That's something that these developers need to understand. Again, final point, once again, repeating myself, easy to play heroes should never get as much value as they do in Overwatch 2. They were all pretty balanced in Overwatch 1, but again, the balance team is weirdly obsessed with bringing all the heroes to the same power level, not realizing that this causes more problems than it does solve anything. That's going to be it for this video. If you guys want to support the channel, you can do so for free by hitting like and subscribe. And then in the comments, I want you to tell me what your thoughts are on counter swapping and who do you hate seeing the most in a counter swapping scenario when you're playing a specific hero. Alternatively, if you want to support the channel financially, you can use the super chat down below. I'd appreciate it if you want to throw 10 bucks my way and things like that. But you don't have to. I mean, you could. You don't have to. And finally, I hope to see you in the next video.